Hello and welcome to ESL Revolution. I am your content creator, Dr. B. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you are safe, you're washing your hands and keeping protected during this time of crisis here in Daegu. I'm sure that you'll be fine and we'll be back to classes before you know it. So today I want to add another video to the What Is It series, and in this one particularly I'm going to be touching on something that is going to be used throughout the entire semester. Prior to this, a lot of the What Is It series just had to do with little things to help you understand some of the concepts and foundations of the class that we will have, and I will link to some of those videos up in the corner here. But what I'm talking about today is going to have an effect on you for the entire semester, whether you are a beginner student, intermediate, or an advanced student. This is something that I'm going to be marking you on and evaluating you on throughout the entire semester for all of your in-class stuff and presentations, etc. And that is your use of body language. And body language is one of those things. I've got a lot of notes here, so I've written them down so I can keep myself prompted and going along. So that's why I do have my notepad with me today. I've got 8 pages of notes for you. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer video than normal. But it is super important, and I cannot stress how important this is going to be, not only for my class, but also for other university classes you take, depending on your major, of course, and also what happens in your life outside of school, what happens after you graduate, what kind of job do you have, etc. There's all sorts of uses for body language that are going to be essential for your interaction over the next coming decades, not just months or years, but for the rest of your life. Now, one of the reasons why I'm talking about this is because there is a big distinction that I think is very important to start off with in terms of how body language is seen to a Korean person versus a non-Korean person, a foreign teacher to a student. And of course there are rules to the exception, so I'm not saying that all foreigners are like this, and I'm not saying all Koreans are like that. But in my time here in Korea, I have noticed, and being in the classroom, I have noticed some things that demarcate Korean body language versus Western body language, or international body language, I guess I should say, that will, I think, help you to understand a little bit about why I think this is so important. And I'm going to come to that at the end of the video. So this is not to say that body language is not important, because it absolutely is. And there's lots of reasons why at the end of the video. So stay tuned, and if you haven't already, subscribe down below, hit the notification button, and you will be updated as to weekly video drops that I do, at least 1 or twice a week. So first of all, I want to explain what body language is, because of course we might have different understandings of what body language is, or we may have an idea in our mind that may or may not fit the definition particularly. And body language is essentially non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication. This includes any kind of physical behavior that is used for expression of who you are as a person and for information. So I'm using body language, hand gestures, for example, to indicate a message that I want to send to you based on my eye contact, my posture, my gestures, my smile, etc. And In this idea of body language, there are several kind of subcategories of body language, and I'm going to be touching on these as well to help you understand exactly what these are. Facial expressions, body posture, physical gesturing, eye contact, touch, and the use of space around you. So those are the different types of body language subtopics that are involved in this whole situation that I'm going to be talking about today. Now, here's a little known thing. I didn't actually know this, so this is new to me just as much as it is to you. Body language, human body language, is actually called kinesics. Didn't know that. Kinesics, body language, interesting. And it involves two aspects, not only the use of body language, but also the interpretation of body language. So right now, you're watching this video and you're interpreting all of my body movements, all the ways that my eyes are looking at you through the camera, my hand gestures, the way that I tilt my head one way or the other, etc. All of that comes into an interpretive aspect, which falls also under body language. It's not just how I use body language, but also how body language is interpreted. And that's another key thing that we're going to be talking about later. Now, when we think of body language, it is in fact a language. However, it is very different than Korean language or English language, Chinese, Japanese, Russian, German, whatever. Those are all spoken languages. And those languages have very specific rules of grammar, ordering of noun, verb, and subject, all those things, right? They all have very, very specific rules. Body language, however, is much more open-ended, meaning that it doesn't have clear rules across the board for all people to learn and study and therefore become aware of. The clearest way of explaining this is in fact that each culture and even each subculture within a larger culture is going to have nuanced body language that can be seen as useful in X country, but not in Y country, or something in the North, it cannot be easily relatable to something in the South, for example. And I don't mean North Korea or South Korea. I'm just using the directions of North and South to indicate difference here. So without a clear line of rules, obviously there are going to be misinterpretations within body language, and we have to be careful of those. This is especially true when we travel, because some uses, some gestures, some body language is actually seen as very negative or hostile in another culture, and we ought to be careful of those when we're traveling from Korea to another country, or from another country to, again, another country, who knows. So interpretations can be culturally defined. However, there are some body language gestures that do have a more universal appeal. For example, if I'm smiling about something, then that would generally indicate that I'm happy, right? I'm not going to be smiling and saying I'm so upset, I'm angry. No, that's not the way that works. So there are certain things in the body language that does have a universal appeal, but not everything does, and we should excuse me, and we should be aware of that. Now, some research in body language suggests that there is actually a very high percentage of information that is translated to the other person or to the audience through nonverbal communication. And I have read that it could be up to 80%. And that is a huge amount of information. 80% of all of my information coming to you is based on the physical cues that I'm giving you to help you understand the words that I'm speaking. And that's pretty amazing to think about that. Now, we use body language all the time. We use it literally all the time, except maybe when we're sleeping. But when we're awake, we're going to use body language in some way, shape, or form all the time that we are awake. Now, I'm going to give you a really clear example as to how body language can manifest itself. I'm going to use students as an example, not necessarily you in my class particularly, but students generally over the last few years. I have watched my students at certain times outside of the classroom. I'm just walking from one building to another, and I see a student that is in my class. That student is with their friends. Awesome. What are they doing? Laughing, giggling, touching each other, fist bumping, doing all sorts of things. And as soon as they see me, they stop, right? That natural body language in some way, shape, or form just stops, and their body language changes because they've seen me. Or what I've also seen in the classroom is because I've seen their chingu body language, their friend body language, the body language that they use on an everyday basis with people that they're comfortable with, changes dramatically once they come into the classroom. That too is a type of body language, but it's natural, but it's not a way to convey a particularly comfortable message in the classroom to either other students or the teacher themselves. So we have this difficulty in what kind of body language should we actually use in the classroom? Do we use a very rigid, tight type of body language in the classroom, especially with a native teacher? Or should we be more relaxed and casual, have more eye contact, more gesturing? Which one would better serve you in the long run in the native teacher class? And we're going to talk about that a little bit also later. Now, this distinction between classroom body language and outside of the classroom body language, I can assure you can be extremely frustrating sometimes to a native teacher. And there's a reason why. Culturally, Westerners typically do use more body language. They're more open with body language. They use a lot more hand gestures. They're willing to be perhaps even a bit more silly with their body language. That's not to say, of course, that all foreigners do this. No, that is certainly not the case. And I don't want to suggest that everyone does that. But there is more body language usage, generally speaking, within a foreign group. In the Korean group, I'm specifically shouting out the Korean group, particularly because, of course, this is where I'm teaching. So I'm trying to put the information in that particular context. Of course, if you are from another country and you have different body language, put a note down below. Tell me where you're from and tell me how body language works for you. I'd be interested to hear that. But there is an expectation that when you come into the classroom, the rigid body language should not really be there. I mean, it's understandable because there's nervousness at the beginning, maybe a little bit of anxiety. That is body language. When you come into the classroom like that, that's a normal type of body language. It's a normal reaction to the first couple of classes, perhaps, with the native teacher. However, if that body language continues over the course of several weeks or a month or even the entire semester, for native teachers, that seems to be an indication that the student is extremely uncomfortable for the entire time that they're in that class. Now, for us, we see that, we recognize that discomfort, but it can also be frustrating because we're left with the question, why? What am I doing to elicit that kind of response? Everybody else seems to be having fun, or at least they're starting to warm up. So why is student X having trouble? That's not a question that I'm going to talk about today, but it's certainly something that I want to leave in your mind to think about in terms of your own personal dynamic. And there could be many reasons why that is the case. Maybe that is just the way that they are. That's the way that they hold themselves in multiple situations, not just in my class or another native teacher's class. Or perhaps it's a dynamic of the entire educational institution that has allowed or, kind of created a more rigid system, especially in high school, trying to get that KSAT done effectively, that maybe there's something in your educational past that has demanded that kind of body language. But in a native teacher's classroom, body language is seen as a way of expressing oneself and also being comfortable with oneself. When body language is rigid, it tends to demonstrate that you're anxious, nervous, or simply unwilling to engage the topic at hand. So keep that in mind. Now, there are 5 different types of body language that I want to talk to you about today to give you a sense of what body language I'm looking for in a classroom. Well, the first is facial expressions. Facial expressions includes things from the eyes, from the eyebrows, from the lips, from the nose, from the cheeks. All of those facial expressions express emotion. You are emoting when you do that. And it doesn't matter what type of expression you have on your face, you are still emoting something, even if you're not smiling. And you're kind of looking down here, or you're looking up here, and you're not smiling, or you're not, your face is blank. That in and itself is an emotion. You are responding in a particular way, and your facial language is giving me, the teacher, a message. It's also giving all of the other students in the classroom a message as well. Body posture is the second of the types of body language. And posture indicates certain emotions that actually match or are equated with your facial expressions. For example, if I'm smiling, I'm going to hold my body posture in a particular way. If I'm angry, I'm also going to hold my body language in a particular way, just as an example. And we read facial expression and body posture simultaneously. We read those two things together. So if our face is saying one thing and our body is saying another, there's an issue there. And we as an audience can't interpret which emotion you're trying to present, right? If I'm standing here like this and I'm smiling and I'm tapping my foot on the ground, you can't see that I'm doing that, of course, because I'm on camera. But what message am I trying to say? Am I trying to tell you that I'm upset, or am I trying to tell you that I'm happy? See, body language can be confusing at times to the audience. The third is gestures. And there are two general classifications or categories of gestures. The first is open gestures and the second is closed gestures. An open gesture, for example, is if I'm using my hands and I'm doing this, or I'm opening Like I'm in some way opening my hands in a way that is trying to convey a message, but at the same time, it means that I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm trying to give you as much as I can, as much leeway as I can, and trying to tell you that I'm trying to be as open and honest with you as possible. Now, there's other languages as well, and that is closed gesturing. So I could be doing this, could be holding my arm around my chest, closing myself off, quite literally, closing my body off from any type of communication. Even when I'm doing that, even when I've closed myself off, I have in fact provided body language. Now, there's something else here too. I could be using this gesture, for example, and it would seem like I'm closing myself off. However, if I'm doing this and I'm leaning in a little bit, that actually indicates that I'm being attentive to what's going on. I'm paying attention to what is going on in the room around me. I am engaged in an interesting conversation. And so by leaning in, I'm actually showing that I'm engaged. So there's nuance within those gestures that we ought to be careful of. Now, eye contact is number 4, eye contact. This is probably, in my opinion, the most basic of body language features. We use our eyes to scan, look, read, look all around us all the time. We are looking at people, things, objects in the classroom, in the environment. We might be looking down at our phones or looking at the teacher or engaging in a conversation. Now, when we do this, let's say in a presentation, which you're going to have a couple of, and when you are engaged at looking at the audience randomly, just pick a person and you're talking to them for a few seconds and then you move your eye contact to somebody else. That displays two things. Number one, that you are confident as a presenter, and number two, you are confident in the material that you're presenting. You don't have to look at a script. You don't have to read off of a piece of paper in order to present the material. So that's something that's going to be effective when we are doing our presentations in class. However, on the flip side, we have looking up at the ceiling, looking down at our shoes. Those indicate the exact opposite. Those types of eye contact body language, that would give the message that you're nervous and that you are actually unprepared because you're trying to stall, or you're trying to think of what comes next in your presentation. So those are things that can limit a good type of presentation. The last thing I want to talk about, I guess this is actually number 5, is the use of space. Now, in our classrooms, we have a varied amount of space depending on the classroom, but most classrooms have like a little stage up at the front that we can use. Most of the times I'll be standing on that. I will have the whiteboard behind me, maybe the screen, and I will be using that space, walking back and forth like this, pointing, asking questions. I use the physical space around me, again, to present a message. I'm showing to you that I understand what I'm talking about, that I've practiced and prepared, and I'm ready to engage you in the classroom. If I'm doing a lot of this, or I'm doing a lot of this, it probably indicates that I'm not as ready. And you know what? You can catch me on that. And it's a good chance that if I keep looking up at the ceiling or the floor, there's a good chance that I'm not as prepared for classes that day as I should. And you should call me out for that, because that means I'm not doing my job very well. But using that space can be really handy. Now, of course, I'm not doing as much of that now in front of the camera because I only have a fairly limited space to record from. But obviously, if I'm not standing in front of a camera and I'm up in front of the classroom, I'm going to be walking back and forth, pacing forward, coming backward. All of those things will be a part of the way that I engage, including coming off the stage and walking around the classroom as groups are talking about particular problems or questions that we're faced with. That too is a part of body language. One of the things that you can do, one of the things that you can practice when you have that screen behind you is, can you do multiple forms of body language at the same time? For example, if I know that I have a particular picture up on the screen, I can look at the audience, I can use my eye contact, and I can walk from one side, point, keep talking, use my other hand, and point again. I'm using multiple forms of body language at the same time in order to convey. I know the information. I know what I'm talking about. I'm presenting it to you. I'm confident enough to know what's there. I'm confident to know the information here. And I'm confident enough to still be looking at you all the while this is going on. Now, that's a lot of information, and I understand that. And some of you might be wondering, but why? Why should I even care that this is something in the What Is It series? Well, that's a very good question, and I do want to touch on that. The first is, very simply, your scores are going to go higher in my classroom if I see that you're trying to use body language. In most of the evaluations that I do, body language is an actual component of your overall score. It's about a fifth of your score, depending on the total. So if it's out of 10, let's say 2% of your total score is going to go toward body language. Doesn't seem a lot, but it could be the difference between a D and a C. Or even worse, it could be the difference between a B and an A. It does make a big difference. That's just as an example, of course. So it's going to give you a higher score when I see that you're trying to use body language as effectively as you can. The second reason why I think body language is helpful is because you are now, as students at university, engaged in an entirely new way of learning. In high school, it was very much sitting at a desk, taking notes, trying to memorize as much as you can in order to get that score for the KSAT test. Universities don't always operate on the same level as that. They put more of the onus of learning on you, and the professor, Korean professor, let's say, is there to provide you with a certain amount of information, but there may be presentations in your major that you need to be prepared for. I have seen this happen walking around the hallways. I have seen students doing presentations in other Korean majors. So it is something that you need to be aware of. And the practice that you get in an English context, even though you're using English language to present, the work that we will do with you to help prepare you for those eventualities will, I think, help you in your majors as well. It's going to provide a better presentation for your Korean majors or even an elective course, and that will again demonstrate that you're confident and comfortable with the material and that you're able to engage the audience in a meaningful way. So that's the second reason. The third reason why I think this is important is because it's going to help you become more comfortable with yourself as time goes on. Body language is in some way a natural thing, but sometimes we have to think about what we're doing. We have to consciously think, I'm going to use hand gestures. Make sure you remember to use hand gestures. And that message is going to be going on in your mind as you're presenting, or even if you're in a small group, what kind of gestures are you going to be using? Now, quite often, at least in my experience, and I can only say this from my experience, that body language, when I see body language, the people who are using it, seem to be far more comfortable with using it. And they are more comfortable with themselves generally. They're more open, they're willing to communicate, they're willing to engage other students. So there is a manner that body language can demonstrate one's comfort generally in their life. Now again, there's rules to the exception, but this is just what I've noticed over the last few years of teaching. The fourth reason and the last reason why body language is going to be important is because in the long term, you're eventually going to be leaving university. You're going to be looking for a job. You're going to be engaged in a job interview process, maybe multiple job interview processes. And how you connect to the interviewer is going to have a big impact on your potential for that job. For example, if you have 5 people in the lineup going in for an interview, and you all typically have the same type of body language going into that interview, it's going to be a lot harder for the interviewer to decide who are they going to pick. But if you can demonstrate some use of good body language within the interview itself, that's going to put you one notch above the other 4 people. That's going to be points in your favor. That's going to be something that they're going to look at. They're going to say, that's interesting. That person's more comfortable and more confident about what they're talking about and how they're talking to me. Of course, we all get nervous in interviews. That's not what I'm talking about. We do have that. But of course, it is something to keep in mind. I think I just spat on my camera lens. Uh-oh. Hopefully that won't show up in the video. So those are 4 things that 4 reasons why I believe body language is important. And of course, I'm sure you might have others as well that we can talk about. Now, how do we use body language? How do we prepare to engage in that type of language usage? Well, like everything, body language takes preparation. It takes time to develop, especially if you haven't used it before. And this is going to require some long-term thinking on your part as students. You have 4 years at university now, 2020. If you're a new student and this is your first semester, you'll be graduating at the end of 2024. Now, this means you have 4 years to begin that process of practicing and utilizing body language to the point when you get to the 4th year, it's going to be far more natural as to what it perhaps is now. The other reason, the other way that you can practice is simply practice. The more you do it, the better you're going to become at it. And I've said this to my students before too, especially when preparing for a presentation. Present in front of a mirror. Watch yourself present. Don't read the script. Actually, put the script aside and look at the mirror. Look at what you're doing. How is your body language? And take mental notes. I think my body language is pretty good. I'm using eye contact. I'm using gestures. Or on the flip side, maybe I'm standing a little bit too rigid. Maybe I need to relax a little bit. Drop my shoulders, smile, have more eye contact. That's something that you can practice by yourself. The other alternative, of course, is practicing with someone that you trust. Have them video record you in a classroom. There might be an empty classroom somewhere. You have a couple of people in your team. You go into a classroom together. You bounce off of each other. Take your phone, record the individual. Then the next person goes up and you record for them. And that way you can actually see a physical recording of your 5-6 minute presentation and take notes as to where you need to make improvements. So all of that are little things that you can do to kind of help you get into the mindset of using conscious body language in a presentation. Okay. Now, that's all I got. And that's a lot because this presentation's been going on for 35 minutes already. And you're probably thinking, teacher, shut up. So I'm going to. On that note, you're at university to learn. And body language is one of those elements that you're going to have to master and learn as you go through the next 4 years. And what better way to help do that than to use the language classroom as your way of getting into that new role for yourself. It's going to take time. I understand that. But don't let this opportunity go to waste when you can work in a semi-closed environment and using or not using body language is not going to have as detrimental effect on your life overall. And if you have any concerns about this, come and talk to me in a classroom. And if you don't know how to say the sentence, use Kakao Talk or Papago or whatever to help me understand what you're trying to say, and we'll work through it. That's my job, is to make sure that you're successful in the classroom. And I think I can help you do a good job using this. Body language will help you improve your language usage. It will help you feel more confident, and at the same time, you'll become more natural. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. This has been a long video, I know. I apologize, but there was so much in here for me to get through, and I certainly didn't want to spend half an hour of class time talking about this, so I'm glad you've stuck through. I will see you in class. Stay safe, everybody, and remember, be the revolution.